Before we start, please subscribe and like the video. I used to think of a life as a house, a structure built board by board, nail by nail. You get the foundation right, you put up the frame, and then you start filling it with memories, with furniture, with the scent of coffee in the morning and the quiet hum of a refrigerator at night. You put in the light fixtures, and for a while, everything glows. For a long time, my house was sturdy. It was built with my hands, and with the hands of my partner, Iris Vaughn. We were a team. She was the one with the eye for detail, the one who found the perfect shade of gray for the living room walls, the one who insisted on the reclaimed wood for the kitchen island. I was the one who could make it happen, the guy who knew how to measure twice and cut once, the steady force that made sure everything was plumb, level, and true. Our life was a home we built together, brick by brick, shared dream by shared dream. We met in our late 20s, both of us a little tired of the dating scene, a little bruised by what came before. We found a kind of peace in each other, not a roaring passion, but a quiet, dependable heat that was more comforting than any fire. We were a Monday night kind of couple, the kind that made dinner together, maybe put on a record, and didn't need to say much to feel connected. The kind that knew the exact spot the other person liked to be scratched on their back, or the particular way they preferred their coffee on a Saturday morning. We were the comfortable, the predictable, the stable. We had a rhythm, a cadence to our days that felt as natural as breathing. I worked as an urban planner, spending my days sketching out green spaces and traffic flows for a city that was always growing faster than we could keep up with. She was a graphic designer, a freelancer who worked from home, her corner of the office filled with sketchpads, dual monitors, and the quiet tapping of a stylus on a tablet. We'd have lunch together most days, a simple meal we'd each throw together, and we'd talk about our projects, about the new coffee shop that opened on the corner, about nothing and everything. It was a good life, a quiet, fulfilling, unexceptional life. I was happy. I thought she was too. The change didn't come like a storm. There was no lightning strike, no thunderclap that shook the foundations of our home. It was more like a slow, creeping frost, a subtle shift in the light, a drop in the temperature you don't notice until you're shivering. It started with her phone. Not that she was hiding it, but it was just always there, always a little closer than it used to be, on the kitchen counter, next to her plate at dinner, on the nightstand where it had never been before. Our routine had always been to put our phones on the charger in the hallway at night, a little ritual to separate work from rest, digital from real. One night, I noticed hers wasn't there. I found it tucked under the pillow on her side of the bed. I didn't think anything of it then. She was probably just scrolling through something, I told myself, a late-night scroll that she didn't want to stop. But it happened again, and soon, the charger in the hallway was just for me, another change. So small I almost missed it. Her energy. Iris had always been a quiet person, an introvert who found her peace in the solitude of her studio or a good book. But she had a certain kind of glow when she was with me, a comfortable, settled warmth. That warmth started to fade, replaced by something new, a jittery, almost electric energy. She was more social, more inclined to go out with her friends, more animated when she spoke. She'd come home from these outings, her cheeks flushed, her eyes bright, and she'd talk for hours about the people she'd seen, the things they'd said, and I would listen, happy to see her so alive. But there was a distance there, a new space between us that hadn't existed before. It felt like she was a star that had drifted into a different galaxy, and I was just watching her light from a million miles away. I started to feel like a footnote in her new story, a supporting character in a life that was now all about her. I would lie in bed, long after she'd fallen asleep, and I'd replay these moments in my head, the phone under the pillow, the too bright smile, the way she would glance at her watch, a new silver one I didn't recognize, during dinner, as if she was counting the seconds until she could be somewhere else. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself this was just her coming into her own, finding new passions. And a part of me believed it. A part of me wanted to believe it so badly it hurt. Because the alternative was a crack in the foundation of my house, a whisper of a lie in the quiet of the night, a lie that felt like it had been there all along, waiting for me to finally see it. I would reach for her hand across the dinner table, and she would squeeze it back, but the squeeze felt different. It was a squeeze of habit, of memory, not of presence. Her eyes would be somewhere else, in a different room, with a different person. And in those moments, I started to feel the first shivers of that creeping frost, the beginning of the end of our season together. I wanted to talk to her, to ask her if everything was okay, but the words felt too big, too heavy to bring up in the middle of a mundane Tuesday evening. They felt like a stone I was afraid to drop into the still pond of our life, because I didn't want to see the ripples. The silence was safer, the pretense was easier, and so I chose the pretense. For a little while longer, letting the slow, quiet decay of our relationship take root, pretending the house wasn't already starting to crumble. The slow, quiet collapse of our world continued, a subtle and almost imperceptible downward spiral. The changes were no longer just about her phone or her energy, they were now about the physical space between us. Our bed, which had always felt like a sanctuary, a warm and safe island in the night, now felt like a continent, with the distance between us as vast as an ocean. She would lie on her side, facing away from me, a silent wall of a back separating us. When I would reach out to touch her, to place a hand on her waist, she would tense for a fraction of a second, a small, involuntary flinch that spoke volumes. It was a betrayal in a single, muscle-tightening movement. I started to sleep with my back to her, a mirror of her own posture, not out of anger, but out of a self-protective instinct. It felt safer to retreat into my own solitude, to pretend I was alone in the bed, than to feel the sting of her rejection in the dark. Our conversations, once a free-flowing river of thoughts and feelings, became a series of small, polite exchanges. We'd talk about the weather, about grocery lists, about work. We discussed the logistics of our lives, the mechanics of our days, but the emotional content was gone. The questions I used to ask, the ones about her dreams, her fears, her inner world, now felt like an intrusion, and she didn't ask me anything at all. The silence between us, once a comfortable blanket, had become a shroud. It was filled with unspoken things, with the ghosts of questions and the echoes of lies. One evening, a friend of mine, Leo Harden, came over for dinner. He and Iris had always gotten along well, their banter easy and natural, but that night, it was different. She was quiet, almost withdrawn. She would answer his questions in monosyllables, and she avoided eye contact. I tried to carry the conversation, to fill the void, but the air in the room was thick with a tension that was impossible to ignore. After she went to bed, Leo leaned in, his voice low. "Hey man, everything okay?" he asked, a genuine concern in his eyes. I just nodded, a weak smile on my face. "Yeah, fine, just tired, I guess." He didn't push it, but I could tell he didn't believe me. He knew me too well. He knew that I wasn't just tired. He knew that something was wrong, something fundamental and unfixable. He left shortly after, and the silence in the apartment felt heavier than ever. It felt like I was standing in the ruins of a collapsed building, surrounded by the dust of what used to be our life. I started to notice other things, small, almost insignificant details that, in the aggregate, formed a devastating portrait. The way her hair, always tied back when she was working, was now styled, her makeup done, her clothes chosen with a meticulousness that was new. She was preparing herself, not for me, but for a world outside of me. She started staying out later, and the excuses were flimsy, thin veils that barely covered the truth. "Dinner with a friend," she'd say, or "just grabbing a drink with a coworker." And I would nod, pretending to believe her, pretending that I didn't see the little inconsistencies, the small details that didn't add up, the faint scent of a cologne that wasn't mine, A fleeting whisper of a smell on her scarf that I would catch a few moments after she came home. I would sit on the couch, the TV on but the volume low, and I would wait, and as the hours ticked by, a cold, hard knot would form in my stomach, the knot of a man who knows, but doesn't want to know. The knot of a man who is watching his life unravel in slow motion, powerless to stop it. I started to feel like a detective in my own home, a man searching for clues in a crime scene, but the crime wasn't a single act. It was a slow, deliberate demolition of a shared life. I would check the mileage on her car, the timestamps on her phone, the receipts in her purse, not to catch her, not to confront her, but to gather evidence, to confirm what my gut already knew. It was a cruel, desperate game I was playing with myself. A slow-motion descent into a paranoid hell, and the worst part was that with every new piece of evidence, every new confirmation, I didn't feel anger, I felt a kind of quiet, desolate sadness, a sadness that came from the loss of a beautiful thing, a sadness that came from the death of a dream. My life was no longer a house I was building, it was a monument to a life that had been. The mask she wore, the one of the happy, busy woman with a full social calendar, was getting harder to maintain, and the cracks were starting to show. Her lies were no longer just about where she was, but about who she was, the Iris I had known, the one who found joy in the quiet rhythms of our life, was gone. In her place was a stranger, a woman with a nervous energy and a too bright smile that never quite reached her eyes. One morning, I was going through a pile of mail on the kitchen table, and a small, official-looking envelope slipped out from under a magazine. It was addressed to Iris. My heart, a quiet, steady drum for years, gave a sudden, panicked lurch. I knew, with a certainty that was both chilling and undeniable, what it was: a hotel receipt, not for a business trip, not for an outing with friends, just a hotel bill, from a downtown boutique hotel, for a single night, a few weeks ago. The date was one of the nights she had told me she was staying late at a friend's place. Her friend, of course, was another lie. I held the receipt in my hands, a thin slip of paper that felt heavier than a lead brick. It was the confirmation I had been dreading, the final piece of evidence in a case I had been trying not to solve. I didn't shout, I didn't cry, I just stood there, the paper a silent testament to a betrayal I had known about long before I had proof. My world, the one I had so carefully constructed, didn't shatter into 1,000 pieces with a loud crash. It just deflated, like a balloon with a slow leak. I walked to the garbage can, the thin paper crinkling in my hand, and I threw it away. I didn't want to confront her with it. I didn't want to see her face contort into a mask of guilt, or worse, indifference. The confrontation, the melodrama, the loud, angry words, it all felt so pointless. It wouldn't bring back the woman I loved, the woman I thought I knew. It wouldn't fix the broken thing between us. I just wanted to be done with it, done with the lies, done with the pretense, done with the slow-motion car crash of our life. And so, I chose silence. I went about my day as if nothing had happened. I went to work. I sketched out my plans. I ate my lunch. I came home. But everything was different now. The world, once vibrant and full of color, had turned gray. The laughter of strangers on the street, the cheerful honking of a car, the gentle rustling of leaves in the wind, it all sounded muffled, as if I were listening to it from underwater. I was a ghost in my own life, a man haunting a home that was no longer his. I was an observer, a quiet witness to the end of a love story. When she came home, she was chipper, a little too loud in her greeting, a little too quick to ask about my day. I answered her questions in a monotone, my voice flat and lifeless. She didn't seem to notice, or if she did, she chose to ignore it. The silence of my grief, my quiet rage, was a language she didn't want to speak. We sat down to dinner, a meal she had thrown together with a hurried, almost careless hand. She was on her phone, scrolling through social media, a small smile playing on her lips. She looked up at me, a quick, almost panicked glance, and then back down at the phone. It was a perfect, devastating little moment. She was a woman living a parallel life. A woman with two realities, and in one of them, I was just a ghost, a silent figure at the dinner table, and I was okay with that. I had already left. My heart had already packed its bags and walked out the door. The physical part of me was still there, but the emotional part of me, the part that had loved her, the part that had built this house with her, was long gone. I looked at her, really looked at her, and I felt nothing, no anger, no sadness, no love, just a profound, aching emptiness. She was a stranger to me, a woman I had once known and now knew nothing about. The silence of the betrayal was a far deeper wound than any loud argument could have been. It was a silence that meant the end of all communication, all trust, all hope. It was the quiet, final closing of a door. The silence grew, a vast, echoing chasm between us. Our home became a museum of our past, each object a relic of a life we no longer lived. The reclaimed wood kitchen island, the perfect shade of gray on the living room walls, the record player that no longer spun with our shared music. They were all monuments to a forgotten love. I was living on autopilot, my days a blur of work, of silent dinners, of nights spent staring at the ceiling, listening to the gentle rhythm of her breathing from her side of the bed. The weight of the unspoken truth was a physical burden, a heavy cloak I wore everywhere I went. I felt an exhaustion that wasn't just about sleep. It was a soul-deep weariness that came from carrying the weight of a broken life. My friend, Leo Harden, called me one evening. "Hey man, haven't heard from you in a while. Everything still okay?" he asked, his voice hesitant. I knew he was asking about Iris, about the tension he had felt in our home. I almost lied, almost said, "Yeah, fine," and hung up, but the lie felt too heavy, too much to bear. I took a deep breath, and the words came out, slow and quiet, like a confession. "No, Leo, it's not. It's over." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I knew he was processing it, putting the pieces together, the quiet nights, the strange dinners, the distance he had felt. He didn't ask for details, didn't demand an explanation. He just said, "Come stay with me for a bit. My spare room is empty." And for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of something other than pain. I felt a tiny, fragile spark of hope. I didn't pack much, just a few changes of clothes, my laptop, my toothbrush. I put my stuff in a duffel bag, and I left it by the front door. A silent ultimatum. Iris was in her office, on her phone. As usual, she didn't look up when I walked past, didn't seem to notice the duffel bag by the door. The moment was a quiet, almost anticlimactic one. I wanted to leave a note, to write a long, emotional letter explaining all the hurt, all the quiet betrayals, all the moments of doubt and dread. But what was the point? The words would just fall on deaf ears. She had already left me long before I had the courage to leave her, and so I left in silence. I went to bed. A new distance between us now, not just emotional but physical. The duffel bag by the door was a silent promise I made to myself, a promise of a new morning, a new life. I woke up early, the sun still a sliver of light on the horizon. I got out of bed, careful not to wake her. She was a still figure under the comforter, a stranger to me. I walked to the front door, picked up my bag, and I left. The door closed with a soft click behind me, a sound that felt both final and liberating. I walked to my car, the cold morning air a shock to my senses, a sudden, sharp clarity after months of a hazy, dreamlike existence. I got into my car and I drove. I didn't look back. I knew that the house I had built with her was already gone, and that looking at the empty shell of it would only cause me more pain. I drove to Leo's apartment, a small, cozy place with a futon and a dog that immediately licked my hand. It was a new world, a new beginning. I stayed there for a week, and every day, I felt a new part of myself begin to heal. The silence of her apartment was replaced by the low hum of a city that was still alive, still breathing. The ghosts of our past were gone, replaced by the warmth of a new reality. I didn't talk much. Didn't want to process the details of what had happened. I just wanted to feel the emptiness. The emptiness was a good thing. It meant that the pain was gone, the emotional decline was over, the slow, quiet process of self-healing could begin. The days with Leo were a blur of quiet, healing moments. He didn't push me to talk, didn't force me to explain, he just let me be. He'd make coffee in the mornings, leave a mug on the counter for me, and go to work. I'd spend my days on his futon, the dog, a goofy golden retriever named Winston, curled at my feet, my mind a quiet, empty space. I wasn't thinking about Iris, or the hotel receipt, or the silence that had become our life. I was just existing. It was a kind of emotional hibernation, a retreat into a self that was numb to the world, but slowly, imperceptibly, the numbness began to fade. I started to notice things again, the way the light hit Leo's bookshelves in the afternoon, the taste of the coffee, the warmth of the sun on my skin when I'd sit on the balcony. It was a slow reawakening, a gradual return to the world of the living. I began to find myself again. I started sketching. Not the urban plans for the city, but simple, beautiful things, the lines of a building I saw from Leo's window, the curves of a coffee mug, the gentle slope of Winston's back as he slept. It was a return to the basics, a reconnection with the part of me that loved to create, to build, to make beautiful things. It was a kind of meditation, a way to quiet the noise in my head, to find my center again. I was rebuilding myself, not with brick and mortar, but with pen and paper, with the quiet solitude of my own thoughts. One evening, Leo came home from work and found me sketching. He smiled. "Good to see you doing that again," he said. He didn't ask me what I was drawing, he just knew that I was drawing again, and that was enough. The conversation we eventually had was a quiet one, a gentle, meandering talk about nothing and everything. He didn't bring up Iris, he just talked about his day, about his work, about a concert he was thinking of going to. He was treating me like a normal person, not a broken man, and in that quiet, gentle kindness, I found a part of myself I thought I had lost forever. The healing wasn't a sudden, dramatic event. There was no moment of catharsis, no sudden realization that everything would be okay. It was a slow, quiet process, like the gentle melting of a winter snow. The world wasn't a vibrant, colorful place again. It was still a little muted, a little gray, but there were flashes of color now, here and there, a burst of green in the park, the bright red of a car driving by, the golden warmth of the sun on a winter afternoon. I was coming back to life. Slowly but surely, I started to think about my own life again, my own future, not our future, not the one I had planned with her, but my own. The thought, at first, was a terrifying one. The thought of being alone, of rebuilding a life from the ground up, was a daunting prospect, but as the days passed, the fear began to fade, replaced by a sense of quiet possibility. I could go anywhere. I could do anything. My life was a blank slate, a page that had been erased, waiting for me to write a new story. The freedom was a quiet, gentle joy, a feeling of lightness that I hadn't felt in years. The betrayal, the pain, the slow, quiet decay of our life, it all felt like a lifetime ago. It was a part of my story, a chapter one had to live through, but it wasn't my whole story. My story was still being written, and for the first time in a long time, I was the one holding the pen. The first few weeks after I moved out of the house were a strange mix of profound emptiness and a quiet, almost terrifying freedom. The silence of Leo's apartment, once a comfort, began to feel like a space I needed to fill with my own presence, my own routines. I was no longer a ghost haunting a home, but a man finding his way in a new one. I started doing simple, physical things that grounded me. I took long walks through the city, my urban planners. I seen the world again, not as a series of problems to be solved, but as a vibrant, living organism. I noticed the architecture, the street art, the way people moved through their days. It was a different way of seeing, a way that wasn't filtered through the lens of a shared life. I was just a man, walking, breathing, existing, I began to rediscover the simple joys I had forgotten, the taste of a perfectly brewed cup of coffee from a small cafe, the feeling of a cool breeze on a hot day, the quiet satisfaction of finishing a good book. These were small moments, insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but they were mine. They weren't a part of a shared life, they were a part of my life. A new life I was building for myself, one small moment at a time. The emotional decline was a distant memory now, a dark storm I had weathered. The slow self-healing was in full swing. I was a man with a new focus, a new purpose. My work, once just a job, became a passion again. I started to see the potential in the city, the possibility of creating spaces that were not just functional, but beautiful, spaces that brought people together, that fostered community, that felt like home. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was creating homes for others, at a time when I was rebuilding my own. The betrayal, once a deep wound, had begun to scab over. It was still there, a thin, white scar on the landscape of my life, but it no longer throbbed with pain. It was a reminder, a lesson learned, but it was no longer the defining feature of my life. The anger was gone, the sadness was gone, there was only a quiet, resolute calm. I was a man who had been through a fire, and had come out on the other side, not burned, but forged. One evening, after I had been at Leo's for a few months, I saw Iris. I was walking out of a grocery store, a bag of food in my hands, and I saw her getting out of a car. It was the same car she had been getting into on those late nights. The car of a man I had never met but knew everything about. He was with her, a tall, handsome man with a confident swagger. They were laughing, their hands intertwined. She didn't see me, didn't even glance my way, and for a moment, I saw them, not as a betrayal, not as a crime scene, but as two people who were happy together, and in that moment, I felt a profound, quiet sense of relief. I wasn't angry, I wasn't sad, I was just free. I had been holding on to a ghost, a memory of a woman who no longer existed, and now, seeing her with the man who had been her present for so long, I finally let go. I felt the weight of the past lift off my shoulders, the weight of the pretense, the lies, the quiet pain. I walked past them, my head held high, and I didn't look back. The man I had been, the man who had lived in the gray, had died, and the man I was becoming was a man who lived in the light, a man who was no longer defined by the shadows of his past. The first 6 months of my new life were a kind of waking dream, a long, quiet exhale after holding my breath for so long. I moved out of Leo's place and into my own small apartment downtown. It wasn't the big house I had built with Iris, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every book on the shelf, every mug in the cupboard was a choice I had made for myself. It was a home built with intention. A space that was a reflection of the person I was becoming, not the person I had been. The apartment smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings, a far cry from the rosemary and old tension that had become the scent of my previous life. The quiet was no longer a chasm of unspoken things, but a welcome canvas for my own thoughts, my own peace. I would spend my evenings sketching, not just for work, but for myself. I started a series of drawings of the city, not the grand, iconic buildings, but the quiet, forgotten corners, the old brick alleyways, the peeling paint on a forgotten storefront, the way the late afternoon sun hit a fire escape. I was finding beauty in the overlooked, in the quiet, in the mundane. I was healing myself, one pen stroke at a time. The pain of the betrayal had faded into a dull ache, a memory more than a reality. I would think about Iris sometimes, but the thoughts were no longer laced with sadness or anger. They were just thoughts. I would remember a shared laugh, a quiet dinner, a moment of intimacy, and I would feel a sense of distant nostalgia, like remembering a character in a book I had read a long time ago. The story was over, and I was on to the next one. The meaningful ending wasn't about her getting her comeuppance, or about me finding a new love to fill the void. It was about me finding myself again. It was about the slow, quiet realization that I was enough, that my happiness wasn't dependent on anyone else, that the house I was building now was a home I was building for myself. I saw her one last time. A few years later, I was in a small park I had designed, a green space in the middle of the city that was a quiet, beautiful refuge from the noise and the chaos. I was sitting on a bench, a thermos of coffee in my hand, watching the world go by. She was there, with the same man I had seen her with before, and a small child. They were laughing, the child chasing a pigeon. The man holding her hand. She looked happy, a genuine, unforced happiness that was a world away from the jittery energy she had displayed in our last months together. She caught my eye, and for a moment, our gazes locked. There was a flash of something in her eyes, not guilt, not shame, something softer, something more human. She gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod, a quiet acknowledgement of the past. I nodded back, and then I looked away. There was nothing more to say. The story had been written, and the final page had been turned. I sat there for a while longer, a smile on my face, a warmth in my heart that had nothing to do with the coffee in my hand. It was the warmth of a man who had lost everything and found himself again. It was the warmth of a man who had built a life, lost it, and had the quiet courage to build it all over again. The final chapter of that old life, the one I had shared with Iris Vaughn, was not about an ending but about a beginning. It was about the moment I realized the narrative of my life was not a tragedy but a simple fact. We were two people who had once fit together, and then, slowly, silently, we had grown apart. The quiet pain of her infidelity, the slow unraveling of our trust, was not a punishment but a catalyst. It was the fire that burned away the pretense, the silent lie we had been living, and it left behind the raw, unvarnished truth of who I was without her. My new life was not a grand triumph, a loud declaration of freedom. It was a series of small, quiet victories. The victory of waking up in a clean, quiet apartment that was all my own. The victory of sketching a new design that I was truly passionate about. The victory of having a genuine conversation with a friend. A conversation that wasn't a performance or a lie. The victory of silence, not as a sign of betrayal, but as a sign of peace. The house I had built with her was gone, a memory, but the person I had become was not a broken man. He was a man who was whole, who was capable of love, who was capable of building again. The betrayal, once a defining moment, was now just a detail in the long, winding story of my life. It was a plot point that led to a new direction, a new path. It was the moment I learned that love isn't a house you build with another person. It's a house you build within yourself, a home you carry with you, a sanctuary you can always return to, no matter where you are or who you are with. And in that sanctuary, I found a kind of peace that was more profound, more lasting, and more real than any I had ever known. The sun set outside my window, a quiet, beautiful wash of orange and purple. I put down my pen, the last line of my drawing complete. I stood up, stretched, and walked to the window. The city below was a symphony of light and sound, a vibrant, living thing. I smiled, not because I was happy, but because I was here, I was present, I was alive. And for a man who had once been a ghost in his own life, that was enough. The story of Silas Archer was not a story about a betrayal. It was a story about a man who had to lose his way to find himself, a man who had to watch his house crumble to find the strength to build a new one, a better one, a home that was truly his own.